Gunshots cracked through the darkness, and Mason Thornton snapped awake, heart hammering, revolver already in his grip before his mind even caught up with reality. Wind moaning through the cracks, moonlight cutting across the floorboards, staring at the places where she used to be, the table where she served cornbread, the chair where she hummed while mending, the empty space that was louder than any sound. By dawn he was out on the porch, staring at the New Mexico night peeling into morning, stars scattering like glass across a black sky, land stretching endless and unforgiving. He called it the land of the dead because that's what it was to him. Redemption was 5 miles away, a town clinging to its name like a joke gone sour. Folks there never forgot, and they never forgave, not him at least. 7 years on, they still thought maybe he had Eleanor's blood on his hands, and he didn't fight it, because in some twisted way, he believed it too. Clara Thompson was about the only soul who didn't look at him like a plague. She was all iron and kindness mixed together, the kind of woman grief had tried to break, but failed. She slipped an extra tin of peaches into his order and told him he should leave, start fresh where nobody knew his story. He just shook his head. This land was all he had left of Eleanor. Or maybe it was just his way of punishing himself, living in her shadow forever. Out in front of the store that morning, Reverend Hayes was nose to nose with Sheriff Cooper, and that was a sight worth noticing. Hayes was railing about prisoners being hauled to Washburn's ranch, and Cooper waved it off like it was none of the law's concern. Mason didn't need to hear more. Washburn's name carried its own weight. Cattle baron, ex-officer, half the town in his pocket. Mason had seen enough powerful men do cruel things under the guise of order. He kept his head down, carried his supplies back to the ranch, figured he was done with all that. He wanted solitude, nothing more, nothing less. But fate doesn't respect solitude. He came home at dusk, saw the shed door hanging open, and all the instincts came flooding back. The war, the raids, the way silence sometimes screams. He drew his revolver, stepped inside, heard that faint, ragged breathing. And that's when he found her, crumpled in the corner, dress torn, body bruised, skin blistered from days under the sun, and belly heavy with a child she was still carrying. She opened her eyes wild with terror and pulled a knife on him, whispering not to touch her. He set the gun aside, raised his hands, said he was a doctor once, wasn't going to hurt her. She held on a moment longer, then collapsed, knife clattering to the dirt. He caught her before she hit the ground. And just like that, Mason Thornton, the man who tried to bury his past, was pulled back into it. He carried her inside, treated her wounds with hands that hadn't forgotten their trade, fed her broth when she could swallow, watched her sleep as if by keeping vigil he could stop the world from taking another soul under his roof. She told him her name was Rebecca Winters. Turned out she'd been a nurse in the war. The connection was instant, unspoken. They'd both lived through hell, pieced together bodies, and watched too many slip away. It was a bond forged in silence, in scars. And maybe that was why Mason didn't turn her in, why he let her stay. Or maybe it was Eleanor's photograph on the sill, smiling at him like she already knew the choice he'd make. Over the days that followed, Rebecca didn't just heal. She started weaving herself into the place. She worked the garden Eleanor had once loved. New herbs and remedies passed down from her grandmother, talked about the old ways of medicine like it was scripture. Mason noticed things he hadn't in years, the flowers blooming by the fence line, the rhythm of birds at dawn and dusk, the quiet domesticity of shelling peas on the porch at sunset. It scared him a little, how natural it began to feel, how the cabin didn't feel quite so empty. He caught himself wondering if that was betrayal, if finding a scrap of peace with another woman meant erasing Eleanor. Rebecca never asked for pity, never pressed him about the grief he carried. And maybe that's why he trusted her with pieces of it. He admitted he once swore never to carry a gun again, then confessed the truth, that he only picked it back up after Eleanor's death, because someone had taken her life, and he hadn't been there to stop it. She said nothing, but her silence carried the weight of understanding, not judgment. One evening, as stars cut through the dark sky, Mason whispered to Eleanor's picture that he should send Rebecca away, that whatever trouble she carried wasn't his to shoulder. But he knew he wouldn't. But the kind of man claws out for himself when the world has already judged him guilty. And here's where it gets interesting. You can't help but wonder, was Mason saving Rebecca? Or was Rebecca saving Mason? Was she just a desperate woman who stumbled onto his land? Or was she fate's way of giving him one last chance at grace? You tell me, was he right to keep her hidden? To risk his own fragile existence for hers? Or was he a fool, repeating the same mistakes, letting another ghost slip into his life? So what do you think? And survival aren't as simple as good versus bad. You know what I mean. The morning Mason rode into Redemption for supplies, the whole town felt tighter, like the air itself was carrying whispers. And he hated it, but he couldn't ignore it. The general store door creaked open, and Clara's eyes narrowed the moment she saw the list he slid across the counter. Linen bandages, extra broth stock. Chamomile, ginger. She didn't say it outright, but her gaze lingered a little too long, sharp as a needle. Not much use for a man living alone, she murmured. Mason just shrugged, pretended indifference, but deep down he knew. Secrets don't stay secret long in towns like this. As he left, he caught sight of Sheriff Cooper again, this time in close conversation with one of Washburn's men. Mason knew the type, stiff posture, new boots paid for with someone else's sweat, eyes that never stopped scanning the street for weakness. He walked past, head down, but he felt those eyes trail him, like a man marking prey. Back at the ranch, Rebecca was stronger, moving about the cabin with careful grace. Mason didn't answer right away, just watched the dust motes float in the slanting light. Finally he said, "Farther than I went for Eleanor." That's the truth of it. Rebecca looked at him for a long time, and it wasn't pity in her eyes, it was recognition, like she knew exactly what it meant to live with a weight you can't put down. But that night, the quiet broke. The dogs barked first, low and uneasy. Then Mason caught the faint glint of lanterns bobbing out on the ridge. He doused the lamp, pressed his back to the wall, revolver steady in his hand. Rebecca stood frozen by the window, one hand on her belly, the other clutching the knife she'd hidden in her sleeve again. "They've found me," she whispered. What happened next will stay burned in the soil of that ranch forever. The standoff, the first shot cracking the silence. Rebecca screaming his name from the doorway as the baby inside her twisted with the chaos outside. And in that moment Mason understood. This wasn't about penance anymore, or loneliness, or ghosts of the past. This was about life fighting its way forward through death, about whether a broken man could still stand between innocence and ruin. So let me throw it back to you. When a man draws a line like that, is it courage or desperation? Did Mason finally find redemption in the barrel of his gun? Or was he just making himself another story the town would whisper about? You decide, because sometimes the difference between hero and fool is only clear once the smoke clears.